It was a chilly afternoon in downtown Grayville, where the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the quaint city. The skyline was a tapestry of contrasts. Modern high-rises intertwined with charming, family-owned shops that had stood the test of time. Here, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of pastries from Rosie's Cafe, a beloved local spot where everyone seemed to know everyone else's name. Clara Simmons stepped out of the cafe, her cheeks flushed from the warmth inside, and took a moment to savor the brisk air. She was in her early 30s, graceful and poised, with a quiet strength that belied her delicate appearance. As the wife of the city's commissioner, David Simmons, Clara had become accustomed to the whispers and glances that accompanied her every move. Yet she preferred to keep a low profile, relishing her independence away from the shadow of her husband's political stature. Today, she had indulged in a comforting cup of coffee and a slice of lemon cake, relishing the brief escape from her daily responsibilities. As she approached her car, a sleek, silver sedan parked just a few steps away, Clara's thoughts wandered to the evening ahead. David had promised her a quiet dinner, a rare opportunity for the couple to reconnect amidst their hectic lives. However, as she reached for the door handle, a sudden tension in the air pricked at her senses. Two police officers, Officer Blake and Officer Thomas, had pulled up abruptly beside her, their patrol car's lights flashing in a way that made her heart race. Their sharp eyes scanned her as if she were a suspect in some unseen crime. "Excuse me, ma'am," Officer Blake said, his tone flat and authoritative. "We need to ask you a few questions." Clara's brow furrowed, a wave of confusion washing over her. "Is something wrong, officers?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease churning in her stomach. Officer Thomas stepped forward, his expression stern. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. We need to search you." A knot tightened in Clara's chest. Suspicious activity? She had just left her favorite cafe, where the barista knew her by name. "I'm sorry, but is there a specific reason you want to search me?" she inquired, her politeness fraying at the edges as her instincts flared with alarm. Blake crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing, a smirk ghosting his lips. "Are you refusing a search?" he challenged, his voice dripping with an unsettling authority. Clara felt a rush of indignation. This wasn't right. "No, I'm not refusing, but I'd like to understand why you think I've done something wrong." Her calm demeanor masked a growing sense of violation as she struggled to comprehend the situation. Before she could protest further, Officer Thomas took a step closer, reaching for his handcuffs. "Turn around," he ordered sharply. "We need to search you." Stunned, Clara fought to process what was happening. "Search me? But why? I've done nothing wrong," she exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. "Turn around, ma'am. Don't make this harder than it has to be," Blake barked, his demeanor hardening. As she reluctantly turned, she felt the cold metal of the cuffs snap around her wrists, a visceral symbol of the humiliation she was about to endure. Clara's heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. The laughter and chatter of passers-by faded as they hurried by, avoiding eye contact, each one wrapped in their own world, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable reality unfolding before them. Officer Thomas began an aggressive pat-down, his hands intrusive as he rifled through her handbag and pulled at her coat. Clara's breath quickened, a deep feeling of humiliation flooding her. She had done nothing to warrant this treatment, yet here she was judged, labeled, and reduced to a mere suspect simply for being a black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sting of anger coursed through her as she locked eyes with Officer Blake, who sneered at her. "You sure you're not hiding anything, lady?" Clenching her jaw, Clara summoned all her strength to remain calm. "I'd like to call my husband," she said firmly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. Blake let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, and who's your husband? Go ahead, call him. Let's see who he is." With her hands free, Clara pulled out her phone, her heart racing as she dialed. "You'll find out soon enough," she said defiantly. The phone rang only twice before a deep, commanding voice filled her ear. "Clara, what's wrong?" It was David, her husband, the city commissioner, and suddenly, she felt a surge of strength. "Officers Blake and Thomas are searching me," she said, glancing at the officers, who now seemed to be growing impatient, their smirks fading. "I haven't done anything, but they're treating me like a criminal. I'll be there in 5 minutes," David said firmly before hanging up. Clara stood tall, a flicker of hope igniting within her. She knew David would handle this, but still, the sting of being wrongly accused lingered in her chest like a festering wound. Officer Blake resumed pacing, his eyes darting nervously toward the street, as if summoned by her thoughts. A black SUV approached fast, skidding to a halt. The door swung open to reveal David Carter, tall and imposing in his commissioner's uniform. His eyes flashed with anger as he strode toward the scene, instantly commanding the attention of the officers. "Commissioner Carter," Blake stammered, stepping forward as if to explain himself. David's cold gaze silenced him. "Step aside," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. There was no room for argument, and the officers backed away, suddenly unsure of themselves. "Are you all right?" David asked quietly, turning to Clara, his expression softening as he took in her state. "I'm fine," she replied, though the humiliation still burned within her. But as she glanced at the officers, rigid and uncomfortable, she could feel the tides of justice beginning to shift. As David confronted the officers, demanding an explanation for their actions, Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The calm before the storm had shattered, leaving behind the promise of reckoning. Little did they know, today would be a day they would not forget. A day when the facade of normalcy in Grayville would be stripped away, exposing the ugly truths lurking beneath the surface. And with David by her side, Clara was ready to fight back. Clara stood, her heart pounding, as her husband faced the two officers. The air was thick with tension, a silent audience of onlookers watching the confrontation unfold. Clara felt a whirlwind of emotions, fear, humiliation, and anger colliding within her. She was a woman caught in a storm, and all she wanted was to escape the chaos that had erupted around her. David's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and commanding. "What gives you the right to treat my wife this way?" His eyes bore into Officer Blake, demanding an answer. "Did she threaten you? Did she resist in any way?" The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "We had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Blake muttered, his bravado fading under David's unwavering gaze. "She matched the description." "Matched the description?" David echoed incredulously. "Of what, exactly? A black woman having coffee at her favorite cafe? What a ridiculous excuse for harassment." Clara watched as Blake shifted nervously, his tough exterior crumbling. The words hung in the air, laden with implications that struck at the heart of the matter. She felt the anger rise within her, but the fear kept her rooted in place. It was a reminder that, in situations like these, standing up could mean putting herself in even greater danger. "I'm sorry," Clara finally spoke, her voice steady despite the turmoil. "I didn't realize that being a black woman in this city could make me a suspect." The weight of her words landed heavily in the charged atmosphere. Blake opened his mouth, but no words came out. Thomas, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. "Look, we were just following protocol," he stammered, his voice shaking. "We thought." "Thought what?" David cut him off, the fury in his tone rising. "That you could accost a woman without cause? That you could treat her like a criminal for merely existing in the wrong place? You think this is protocol? This is systemic racism. Plain and simple." The crowd that had gathered seemed to lean in, sensing the gravity of the moment. Clara could feel their eyes on her, and the heat of their stares mingled with the coldness of the handcuffs still clamped around her wrists. She felt vulnerable, yet a flicker of defiance ignited within her. David continued, his voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. This isn't just about you two. This is about how police conduct themselves in our community. You have a responsibility to serve and protect, not to intimidate and harass. Clara's heart raced as she looked at David, his passion igniting a spark within her. She remembered the countless stories she had heard from friends and family, stories of racial profiling, of humiliation, of lives ruined by unjust actions. This wasn't just her fight. It was a fight for everyone who had ever felt the sting of prejudice. In the distance, Clara heard the wail of sirens approaching. Internal Affairs officers were on their way, a wave of dread crashing over Blake and Thomas. Their bravado had melted away, revealing their fear as they realized the gravity of their actions. Your actions will have consequences, David said coldly, pulling out his phone. Clara watched as he dialed a number, his jaw set in determination. I'm reporting this incident. Officers Blake and Thomas need to be held accountable for their actions today. No, sir, Blake pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. We didn't mean to. David cut him off with a fierce look. You didn't mean to what? You didn't mean to harass my wife? You didn't mean to treat her like she was less than human? The officers stood frozen, their previous confidence shattered. Clara could see the shame and regret washing over them. But it felt too little, too late. Just then, the Internal Affairs vehicle pulled up, its sirens silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Officers stepped out, assessing the situation with sharp eyes. They quickly approached David, who stood tall, exuding an authority that demanded respect. What happened here? One of the officers asked, glancing between David and the two men who had been their colleagues moments before. They accosted my wife without cause, David replied, his voice steady. They need to be investigated for their actions. This isn't a case of misunderstanding. It's a blatant display of racial profiling. Clara felt a rush of pride for her husband as she witnessed him take charge of the situation. She had always admired his dedication to justice, but now she saw him as a warrior fighting not just for her, but for all those who had been wronged. As Internal Affairs took Blake and Thomas aside for questioning, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Justice was being served, but the sting of humiliation still lingered. She had been treated like a criminal for simply existing, and that realization filled her with a profound sadness. David turned to Clara, his expression softening as he took her hands in his. I'm sorry you had to go through this, he said quietly, his eyes filled with concern. I won't let this happen again. Clara nodded, gratitude flooding her heart. Thank you for standing up for me, she replied, her voice steady. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. As they stood together, surrounded by the remnants of the confrontation, Clara knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and while today had brought her pain, it had also ignited a fire within her. She would not remain silent. She would be a voice for change. And as the crowd began to disperse, whispers of solidarity echoed in the air, a reminder that in Grayville, justice had to be more than just a fleeting thought. It had to become a movement. Together, they would challenge the status quo, and Clara would make sure that no one else had to endure what she had faced today. The crowd that had gathered on the street corner began to dissipate, murmurs of discontent lingering in the air like smoke from a recently extinguished fire. Clara watched as the Internal Affairs officers led Blake and Thomas away. Their heads hung low, stripped of their previous arrogance. It was a bittersweet victory. While justice was being served, the humiliation she felt still clung to her like a shadow. Are you sure you're okay? David asked, his voice gentle yet firm, as he turned to Clara, searching her eyes for signs of distress. I will be, Clara replied, attempting to convey confidence despite the turmoil swirling within her. She paused, the words caught in her throat. I didn't think something like this could happen to me. David squeezed her hand, offering a sense of solidarity. It happens more often than we realize. Clara, today was about you, but it's part of a much larger issue. We have to address it. Clara nodded, grateful for his support yet feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. They stood side by side, united against the storm, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were at the precipice of something much bigger than themselves. Let's get out of here, David suggested, glancing around at the onlookers who were now whispering among themselves, their faces etched with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. We need to talk, and I'd rather do it somewhere private. Clara agreed, allowing David to lead her away from the scene. As they walked, she took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air tinged with autumn leaves and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the nearby cafe. The normalcy of the moment contrasted sharply with the chaos they had just experienced, and Clara felt her heart begin to slow. They found a quiet booth in the back of the cafe, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the coldness of the street outside. Clara settled into her seat, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on the table. David sat across from her, his expression serious as he studied her face. Clara, he began, his tone earnest, this is more than just a personal issue. It's a wake-up call for our community. We need to address the systemic racism that allows this kind of behavior to happen. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. I know, she said, her voice steady. But how do we change something so deeply ingrained? How do we make people listen? David leaned back, considering her question. We start with awareness. We gather stories, like yours. We share them publicly. We need to show people that this isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a broader pattern. Clara felt a flicker of hope igniting within her. You mean like a community forum? Bringing people together to discuss their experiences. Exactly, David replied, a spark of enthusiasm lighting up his eyes. We could invite local leaders, community activists, anyone who's willing to stand up and speak out. This can be the start of something significant. A smile spread across Clara's face, a mixture of excitement and determination coursing through her veins. I'd like that. I want to share my story, not just for myself, but for everyone who feels voiceless. We have to make them understand that this is real and that it affects lives. David reached across the table, taking her hands in his. You're so strong, Clara. I admire your courage. But remember, this won't be easy. There will be pushback. There will be people who want to silence us. I'm ready for that, Clara replied, her voice resolute. I refuse to let fear dictate my actions any longer. This is bigger than just us. Their conversation flowed, weaving plans for the community forum, brainstorming ways to engage others in the fight against racism. Clara felt invigorated, the adrenaline of their earlier confrontation fueling her passion for change. She envisioned a gathering where people could share their experiences, where stories of pain and resilience could ignite a collective desire for justice. As they spoke, the cafe around them faded into the background, the noise of clinking cups and chatter becoming a distant hum. Clara's heart swelled with purpose. She had a voice, and it was time to use it. Let's set a date, David suggested, pulling out his phone to mark their plans. We'll need to get the word out, flyers, social media, community boards. Clara nodded eagerly, feeling the momentum building. We should reach out to local organizations too. They might have resources to help us. Just then, Clara's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting their planning. She glanced down at the screen and her heart sank. It was a message from her mother. Clara, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? The concern in her mother's words sent a wave of emotion crashing over Clara. She took a moment to gather her thoughts before typing back. Mom, I'm okay. Just shaken up. But I want to talk to you about it. There's so much more to say. David watched her, his brow furrowed with concern. Is everything all right? Clara nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just my mom checking in. I'll call her later. Right now, I'm focused on what's ahead of us." As they returned to their plans, Clara's mind wandered to the larger implications of their fight. It wasn't just about her. It was about creating a legacy of change for her community. She envisioned a future where incidents like hers wouldn't just be brushed aside, where people would feel empowered to stand up and speak out against injustice. Their discussion continued, a passionate exchange of ideas and strategies, until the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow through the cafe windows. Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her. Fueled by the love and support of her husband, they were ready to take on the world, armed with their voices and their story, and together, they would fight to ensure that no one else would have to endure the humiliation Clara had faced that day. It was the beginning of their journey, one that would lead them to confront the very foundations of systemic racism in Grayville. As they left the cafe hand in hand, Clara looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like a protective cloak. The fight for justice was just beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara and David. The incident at the cafe had ignited a fire within them, and their lives quickly became a whirlwind of planning, meetings, and phone calls. Clara found herself immersed in discussions with local activists, community leaders, and concerned citizens who shared their vision for change. It was exhilarating and exhausting, but each conversation reaffirmed her belief in the power of collective action. On a brisk Saturday morning, they gathered at Community Hall, a modest building that served as a hub for local events and gatherings. Clara arrived early, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had spent the night before rehearsing her speech, the words echoing in her mind like a mantra. This was her moment to share her story, to bring light to the experiences that had too often been silenced. As she entered the hall, she was greeted by the buzz of conversation. Chairs were set up in a semicircle, and a table displayed pamphlets and flyers about the forum. Clara took a deep breath, scanning the room filled with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had been touched by similar experiences. David joined her, his presence grounding her amidst the growing excitement. "You ready for this?" he asked, a proud smile gracing his lips. "I think so," Clara replied, her voice steady but tinged with nerves. "I just want to make sure people understand the impact of what happened." "You will," he reassured her. "Just speak from your heart. Everyone is here to support you." The clock ticked closer to the start time, and Clara watched as more people filed in, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and determination. As the crowd swelled, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. They were all here to listen, to learn, and to take a stand against the injustices that plagued their community. Finally, the moment arrived. David took the microphone, his voice calm but firm as he welcomed everyone. "Thank you all for coming today. We're here to share stories, to listen, and to begin a conversation about the issues that affect us all. This is about accountability, understanding, and ultimately, change." Clara's heart raced as she watched David. He had a way of commanding attention, of drawing people in with his passion. When he finished, he gestured for her to join him at the front. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped forward, the weight of the moment settling over her. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm grateful to see so many of you here today. It means a lot to know that I'm not alone in this fight." She paused, allowing the room to absorb her words. "A few days ago, I experienced something that shook me to my core. I was wrongly accused and treated like a criminal simply for being a black woman in this city." The words poured out, each syllable infused with emotion. "I was handcuffed and searched without cause, humiliated in front of strangers, all because of the color of my skin." Gasps echoed from the audience, and Clara could see the empathy in their eyes. She continued, her voice growing stronger. "This isn't just my story. It's the story of so many others who have faced similar treatment. We need to confront the systemic racism that exists in our society. And we need to do it together. Clara felt the weight of her words, the truth resonating through the hall. I refuse to be silent any longer. I refuse to let fear dictate my actions. We must stand up for ourselves and for each other. As she spoke, Clara noticed a woman in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. It struck her that this wasn't just about statistics or headlines. It was about real people with real experiences, all yearning for justice. Change won't happen overnight, Clara continued, her resolve unwavering. But if we come together, share our stories, and demand accountability, we can create a community where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. As she finished, the room erupted in applause, a powerful wave of support that washed over her. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the outpouring of empathy and solidarity. David beamed with pride, and she knew they were on the cusp of something monumental. After the initial speeches, the floor was opened for others to share their experiences. One by one, people stood to speak, their voices shaking but resolute. They recounted their own encounters with discrimination, echoing Clara's sentiments. The stories flowed like a river, each one a testament to the injustices that had been hidden beneath the surface. An elderly man shared how he had been followed in stores simply for being black. A young woman spoke of her fears when pulled over by police, recounting how she always felt she had to prove her innocence. Clara listened, her heart heavy with the weight of their words, yet filled with hope that their collective voices could spark real change. As the forum progressed, a sense of unity began to blossom in the room. People exchanged contact information, promising to work together to raise awareness and advocate for policy changes. Clara felt a sense of purpose enveloping her. Knowing that this was just the beginning, the event concluded with a call to action, urging everyone to participate in upcoming city council meetings and to advocate for community programs focused on diversity and inclusion. Clara watched as people gathered in small groups, discussing ideas and planning future events. There was a palpable energy in the air, a promise of collaboration and determination. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara felt David's hand slip into hers, grounding her once again. "You did amazing," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "You touched so many lives today." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your support," she replied, squeezing his hand tightly. "We're in this together." As they walked out of the community hall, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over Grayville. Clara knew they had ignited a spark within their community, one that would continue to grow. The fight for justice was far from over, but they were no longer alone. Together, they would challenge the status quo and create a future where respect and equality were the norm. Clara took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. The reckoning had begun, and she was determined to see it through. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activism and community engagement. Clara and David poured their hearts into the movement, organizing meetings, outreach programs, and workshops aimed at addressing systemic racism in Grayville. The forum they had initiated had sparked a newfound sense of purpose in their community, galvanizing others to join the fight for justice. As Clara sat at her kitchen table one evening, surrounded by flyers and notes for their next event, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope. The stories shared at the forum had resonated deeply with many, and now, people were stepping forward to support the cause. What began as a personal struggle had transformed into a collective effort to change the narrative of their community. "Clara, can you come here for a moment?" David called from the living room, his voice tinged with excitement. Clara looked up from her papers, curiosity piqued. She quickly made her way to join him. When she entered the room, she found David standing by the television, a news report playing in the background. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. The report highlighted the recent community forum and the subsequent movement that had gained traction in Grayville. Local leaders, activists, and residents were being interviewed, sharing their commitment to fighting racism and advocating for change. Clara watched in awe as her own words echoed on screen, her passion and determination inspiring others to take a stand. "This is incredible," she exclaimed, her heart racing. "People are actually listening." David smiled, pride radiating from him. "And it's just the beginning. We've got the city council meeting next week. And it sounds like we have a lot of support lined up." Clara felt a swell of gratitude. Their hard work was paying off, and the momentum was palpable. "We need to make sure everyone knows what's at stake," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "We have to keep pushing for real policy changes." As they prepared for the upcoming meeting, Clara and David worked tirelessly to gather testimonies, statistics, and proposals for new initiatives aimed at combating discrimination in their community. They reached out to local organizations, educators, and activists, building a coalition of voices that demanded action. On the day of the city council meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Clara and David arrived early, a mixture of excitement and nerves churning within them. The council chamber was filled with supporters, each person carrying the weight of their own experiences. As they took their seats, Clara could feel the energy in the room, a shared determination to demand justice. When it was their turn to speak, Clara took a deep breath, stepping up to the podium with David by her side. The council members sat before them, some attentive, others skeptical. Clara scanned the room, locking eyes with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had rallied around their cause. "Thank you for allowing us to speak today," Clara began, her voice unwavering. "We stand here not just as individuals, but as representatives of a community that is demanding change. Change that is long overdue." She launched into her testimony, recounting her experience with the police officers who had wrongly accused her. The chamber fell silent, captivated by her words. Clara spoke not only of her humiliation but also of the broader implications of racial profiling and systemic discrimination that affected countless others. "Today, we ask for accountability," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "We urge this council to implement policies that promote transparency and fairness in our law enforcement practices. We want to ensure that no one in Grayville experiences what I did. No one should feel threatened or less than human simply because of the color of their skin." As she finished, the room erupted in applause, a wave of support crashing over her. Clara felt a rush of adrenaline, her heart swelling with pride and determination. David stepped forward, echoing Clara's sentiments and outlining specific policy changes they proposed, including enhanced training for officers on racial bias, community policing initiatives, and increased funding for local organizations focused on diversity and inclusion. The council members listened attentively, and Clara could see some nodding in agreement. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted, moving from skepticism to acknowledgement. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt the weight of hope pressing against the heavy burden of injustice. After their presentations, several council members expressed their support and commitment to addressing the issues raised. "It's time we prioritize the voices of our community," one member said. "We cannot turn a blind eye to the reality of systemic racism. We owe it to our constituents to create a safe and equitable environment for all." As the meeting concluded, Clara and David were met with congratulations and expressions of solidarity from their supporters. Clara felt overwhelmed by the collective strength in the room, the unity among people who had once felt isolated in their experiences. In the following days, the momentum continued to build. Clara and David worked tirelessly, organizing rallies, workshops, and community discussions. Their efforts culminated in a large-scale event dubbed the March for Justice, drawing residents from all walks of life who were ready to stand against discrimination. On the day of the march, Clara stood at the front, flanked by David and a diverse group of speakers who would share their stories. The streets of Grayville were filled with people holding signs demanding change, their voices rising in a chorus of solidarity. The atmosphere was electric, Filled with hope and determination, Clara took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. As she stepped to the microphone, she looked out at the sea of faces. Today, we gather not just for ourselves, but for every person who has faced injustice. She began, her voice resonating with strength. Today, we stand united to demand change, to challenge the systems that have oppressed us for too long. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a tidal wave of support that sent shivers down Clara's spine. She felt invincible, knowing that they were making history together. The march continued, winding through the streets as Clara led chants for justice. The energy was palpable, and Clara felt the power of their voices echoing against the buildings, reverberating through the hearts of everyone present. As the day drew to a close, Clara stood at the front of the crowd, taking in the sight of their collective strength. They had come together to confront the injustices that plagued their community. And in that moment, Clara knew they had sparked a movement that could not be extinguished. Walking hand in hand with David, Clara felt a profound sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. Together, they would continue to fight for justice, for equality, and for a future where everyone, regardless of their race, would be treated with dignity and respect. As the sun set over Grayville, casting a warm glow on the gathered crowd, Clara looked around, her heart full of hope. They were not just making a statement. They were forging a path toward a better future, one where every voice mattered and where justice would prevail.